Right, so let me ask you a question. Have you ever, of an evening, got so comfortable? This is how I sit on the couch, by the way. This is why it looks like this. Because Jill has a footstool, so I get one foot on the footstool. And my other foot's always right up underneath. And it doesn't look comfy to anybody else, but actually it is. Do you get so comfortable on the couch in the evening when you're sitting down, chilling out, end of the day, watching the telly, having a cup of tea or whatever, that you can't be bothered getting up to get to bed? Right? So that's where I'm going from this morning, right? Because getting to bed, getting to the best place for sleep we need to recover, to recuperate, to re-energize. To get to that point, sometimes it's a little bit of an effort. We've got to get up from our comfy position. We've got to get up the stairs, well, for most of us. The bathroom, it's lino, it's cold. We've then got to clean our teeth, wash our face. All these things are cold. And then we've got to go into bed and take our clothes off, put our pajamas on, or whatever you sleep in. That is your choice. I'm not going into that. But it's effort. There's a lot to do. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. The effort is uncomfortable. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. Is making the effort. My subject is crossing the Jordan. It's part 3 of Claiming Our Canaan. And the title I have used is Proactive. If we go to Joshua chapter 3, that's where we find the Israelites. They're relaxed, they're comfortable, they're free of the Egyptians, they've conquered the enemies in the immediate area, and it's all good. But there's issues. All I was going to read to us, Joshua chapter 3.
Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits. Between you and the ark, do not go near it. Joshua told the people, concentrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up to the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will go to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know what I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan waters, go and stand in the river. Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that this will certainly drive out you before the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Gershites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. See the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is in a flood of oil during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, Zereth and Wow, the water flowing down to the sea, the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over the opposite of Jericho. The Enet of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed crossing on dry ground.
Thank you. So the context to that is that the Israelites, they had left Egypt. They'd been kicking around the desert for 40 odd years. They landed in a place called Shittim. And God was providing for them. Initially, God was still providing manna. Moses, for the second time on their journey from Egypt, had hit a rock and there was water and it was all good. Everything was easy for them. As I say, they'd conquered the enemies in their immediate area and they were relaxed. And they'd been there for quite a while because they were able to set up a more substantial camp than just their mobile tent. It's easy for us to see how they could get lazy, get complacent, not thinking about what they needed to do, just receiving and chilling. And we can do that with our spiritual journey as well. But to properly receive God's promise of the promised land, they needed to cross the Jordan. In the case of the Israelites, their obstacle was an actual river. Sometimes we face obstacles that get in our way of us moving forward. So this morning, the question I'm going to ask, Jamie asked the question, what is your Canaan? I'm asking the question this morning, what is your Jordan? What is your obstacle that you need to get past? To get to the better stuff that God's got for us. The Israelites, we can see, were on the edge of the promised land, but they weren't in it. And we need to do the same. We need to step forward. They were in a good place. They did the right thing. They stopped. They paused to regroup and refresh. And for the same reason, sometimes it's good for us to pause and to get clarity and to refresh ourselves. Back in the day, before sat-nav and GPS, we actually had to use ordnance survey maps to get around and to know where we were going. And everybody that's been driving for longer than 15 years will have an A to Z somewhere. I remember way back, we used to do the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and I was in a very interesting group. It was Scott Curry, myself, and my big brother. Scott was the responsible adult in this case, for sure. But getting your map out and writing your route and having all the coordinates and everything in a list, and it's all good. But relating that map, which doesn't look, although the Ordnance Survey team have done an amazing job of trying to make it look like the ground and how it's kind of shows you the contours and everything on the map, and so you know how steep the hill's going to be. Or in theory, you know how steep the hill's going to be. But actually walking up that hill is a very different script. But relating what's on the map to what's on the ground is an amazing skill. And this is why I say that Scott was the responsible adult in the group, because he was the only one that could do it properly. And I thank you for that. I'm still here. But it's advantage to take a stop every now and again and relate. Find obvious things that you can definitely go, right, that is definitely that. And that is definitely that. So we must be definitely here. So you know exactly where you're going. Instead of wandering off, charging off in the wrong direction. Because we think we know where we're going. But we're potentially going in the wrong direction. The Israelites paused at Shittim, but God regrouped them, refreshed them, and re-energized them to go on to the next part of their journey. But to do this, they had to be proactive. There's 3 observations that I've seen through my study of areas I think they needed to be proactive in, and I'm going to share that. It was following his instruction, following his lead, and doing the task you've been given. Point 1, clearing the way. In Shittim, the Israelites had seen the death of their leader, their hero, Moses. He'd brought them out of Egypt. He'd done loads of miracles for them as they were going along. And Joshua was put in charge. And I'm sure there was a sense of anticipation, but also apprehension of, okay, what's next? How and where? As the way forward was blocked by a river. But we see that God had his hand in it. Also, on top of the fact that it's an actual river, it was a bit of a ravine, and it was in flood. The bit that Kevin never mentioned last week is that it's not mentioned how the spies got to Jericho. It has potential that they had to swim. That's an aside note. So I'm guessing that all the Israelites didn't want to do that, didn't fancy doing that. So Joshua said to the people in verse 5, he says, consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. When I was reading that, what made me think about it was to bring it into New Testament, to bring it to kind of what we would think as God's talking to the church. Romans 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Both of these instructions are quite similar in nature and quite similar in meaning. Consecration is about setting yourself apart. Paul talks about us setting ourselves apart, a living sacrifice. So my question this morning is, are we following Scripture's instruction and proactively getting our hearts and minds in the right place before we move on? What is your Jordan? Maybe there's stuff in our world that we know that we need to get clear off, to get behind us. Habits, behaviors, attitudes that aren't quite right before we can step into the next part of our journey. We need to identify the block. Point 2, following God's lead. God instructed the priests to go first. And to do that, the priests were going to have to lift the Ark of the Covenant, which is God's presence, and step into the water. Now, I'm pretty sure the priests weren't very excited about that. I know there's a few of us that didn't like to get our feet wet. I'm a bit like that when I'm going onto my kayak, to be fair. To launch my kayak, I actually have to get my feet wet. I can't just sit on it on the beach and it'll go. It has to be in the water and in enough water to take my weight before it'll actually hit the sand. So therefore, I have to get my feet wet. I'm not a massive fan of that because then my feet are wet, my legs are wet, and they're sitting in the cold while my arms are doing all the work. But also on top of that, the water's dribbling backwards, so then my bum gets wet as well. So, sitting in a puddle for the rest of the afternoon. It's great fun. Don't let me put you off. Kayaking is great fun. Anyway, moving on very quickly. But God was saying to them, he says, I'm going first. I'm taking my presence, because the priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. He says, I'm taking my presence and I'm going ahead of you. I'm doing it to show you that I'm not asking you to do something I won't do. I'm not asking you to do something that I'm not with you and for you in. I'm going to be there in the next bit of this journey. I am ahead of you. When the Israelites had followed God's instruction, the priests had done their bit, and the rest of the guys had started walking. God did a miracle, which is amazing. Verses 16 and 17 tell us this. The water from upstream stopped flowing, piled up in a heap a great distance away. At a town called Adam, in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed on dry ground. It's worth noting here that Joshua had told the Israelites, previous to verses 16 and 17, to make sure they kept a safe distance from the Ark of the Covenant, from God's presence. Because of man's sin and because of the fear of God, through various things that had happened in their journey, the Israelites were more than happy to make sure they weren't too close. But the amazing thing is, right, because of God, so they had to be in God's presence, to get into God's presence then, they had to perform sacrifices and rituals and all of this kind of stuff. But because of God's gift and Jesus' sacrifice, we can be right in God's presence. As MP was talking about last month when he said, who are you walking with? We can walk beside God. We have got God with us. As I was saying, that the Israelites, God went with them, God went before them. I was reading a book this week. It's a very short book about My Exciting God. And it's about miracles that the gentleman who wrote the book had seen and been given gifts to do. But what he did mention right at the beginning was that his story of salvation. Because, as he reminded us, that is the biggest miracle. The fact that we can have a relationship with God because of Jesus' sacrifice, because of God's gift of his Son, we can have that relationship. We have that gift. And that, to me, as my father-in-law's book, actually, as my father-in-law said, that is the biggest miracle. We also see from Scripture that God had given God had asserted Joshua's leadership by stopping the water in a similar way that he'd parted the water for Moses, by showing his power over nature, showing that he was in complete control. He also gave us a leadership process in that setup. It says God gave Joshua the instruction, he gave it to the priests and leaders, and then they gave it to the people. The instruction was really simple. It's follow me. It's the same instruction Jesus gave in Matthew. Chapter 9, verse 9, it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. So my question this morning, my further questions this morning are we proactively following his lead? This can be as simple as shining God's love in our workplace, in our home, or it could be a bigger step. Only God knows where he wants to lead us. We need to be listening for his prompting. Through the prophecy from others, or from his word, or from listening to the inner voice in our quiet times, when God's prompting us, prompting our spirit. The only thing we need to be responsible for is making sure we're following. Point 3, doing God's work. I'm going to read the first 7 verses of chapter 4 just to give us context for that. I didn't think it was fair to get Olive to read more. So chapter 3 is a big chapter. So, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests were standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. It must have been really exciting when these guys were picked, yeah? Can you imagine? You remember what it was like at school when they were all lined up and it was like the guys were picking teams. I was always last. That is due to the fact that I'm rubbish at sport and I am very small. And I don't care. But can you imagine the excitement? Like, look at me, I've been picked. This is awesome. So that's verse 3. And then they were given a task in verse 4 when it talks about the pick up a stone and carry it. I don't know if I'd been any good at that. I'm a little bit bulkier now and I can carry heavier things these days, but back in the day, no. But when the time came, they stepped up and they did the task they were asked to do. They didn't try and lead the tribes, or they didn't try and carry the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't try and stop the water. They did the task they were given. It's important for us to do our task and not try and do somebody else's task. There might be occasions, I've seen it myself, I've done it myself. There is moments when we're not even just in church, but in other occasions at work and whatever, we're running events and somebody's been given a job and they are either very slow at the task or they are not quite as experienced as we are, and we're itching. We're trying to, let me help you. Let me tell you how to fix that, how to do that. And it only makes the situation worse because we're distracting the person who's doing their best. So what the Bible's telling us to do is stick to the task that we've been given, not try and do somebody else's job. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13, it says, it was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers, to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Now, these are just some of the tasks that we've been given to do alongside our commission, which is go and make disciples of all nations. We've all been given that job, so we can all do that one without drama. But do we know the role that we've been given? Have we sought God's face and said, where are we? Where am I meant to be? Where do I fit into this picture? In what you're doing in our church right now, God, where do I fit in? And we need to be proactive. Once we know that, we need to be doing it, not kind of going, oh, well, maybe be confident in who sent you, not in your own voice, in your own head. In conclusion, we can read that, in reading this part of Israel's journey, we know that they were on the edge of the promised land, but they weren't in it. We're on the edge of something massive, but we need to motivate ourselves to get there. They had to motivate themselves to get there. They had to follow the instructions. We need to do the same. we've observed like the specific things that we were talking about, following God's instruction, following his lead, doing the task. And I think it's important for us to make sure we're doing the same. We're following God's instruction, following God's lead, doing the task that we've been given. We need to be ready to take the next step with God, even if it looks an awful lot like we're stepping into a rushing river. So my questions this morning are, have we paused too long and got too comfortable? Are we following his instruction? Are we following his lead? Are we doing our part? These are some tough questions that we'll need to spend some time on. In our time alone with God, and also talking to other people. As I say, when we used to do the walk-in, and Scott was the map man, we used to talk to Scott because he knew where we were going. There's no point in me asking my brother because he would have been rather in his bed, to be fair. And motivation was Mark's issue at that point. It's like, why do I need to do this? Because we need 3 people in the team. Just get here. Come on. For some of us this morning, there's the first step. It could be many things. For some of us this morning, it might just be getting the relationship started. For some of us, it might be correcting our direction. We might be going in the wrong direction. And we've wandered off the path. So let's come back. For others, it might be a matter of dealing with a specific issue that's stopping us. There's a stone in your shoe. If we go back to the analogy of the walk-in. For some, it might be taking the plunge, follow his lead. Maybe we know the task we've been given, but we're just not quite confident enough to get on and step out. For some of us, we might be looking for a fresh vision or a fresh task. Whatever your first step is, I recommend 2 things. Talk to God and talk to some of us who have been on the journey a little bit longer. And that could be anybody that has been on the journey longer than you. Because we're here to help. But definitely speak to God because he is the best guide we've got. Father, I thank you this morning that we can come into your presence, and I thank you that we can hear your word. I thank you, you speak to us through the word, through the Old and the New Testaments, and you give us advice and wisdom. And I just pray you'll help us to see that and to use that. Amen.